Tonight at WWE Hell in a Cell, it is Cesaro going up against Seth Rollins. Now, this one's a really interesting match in a strange way, because it's a WrestleMania rematch, first of all, because, of course, Cesaro faced off against Seth Rollins at WrestleMania Night 1, WrestleMania 37 Night 1, and if it wasn't for what was just a really, really strong opening night for WrestleMania, obviously he had that main event, Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks for the SmackDown Women's Championship. This could arguably have been one of the better matches of WrestleMania. It was one of the better matches of WrestleMania weekend, but certainly it could have been match of the weekend, match of Night 1, and then obviously you had the main event on Night 2, which was incredible as well. But it was certainly a real spectacular match between Cesaro and Rollins, and it felt like a real big moment, didn't it? It felt like a massive moment for Cesaro. Now, I spoke about this briefly before, because with everything that Cesaro's been doing over the course of the last year or so, or certainly in 2021 when it comes to this renewed singles push in WWE, Mick Foley. Now, Mick Foley appeared on the Steve Austin Broken Skull Sessions program on the WWE Network, Peacock for those in the United States, but he appeared on the Broken Skull Sessions podcast or program, television program, whatever you want to call it, and they did this PR advertising thing, marketing thing, whereby Steve Austin, he stands at his bar there. I think it's filmed out in Vegas. I think it's filmed out of his home in Vegas. It's a set that's actually built into his home, Steve Austin. It's very impressive. And it was a set that's built out of his home, and they do sometimes they do word associations, sometimes they do, for Mick Foley, they did pain index or whatever. And one of the things they did to hype up the appearance on the Broken Skull Sessions of Mick Foley was a bit of word association with certain superstars. So they mentioned the likes of Sami Zayn, Bobby Lashley, Roman Reigns, Drew McIntyre, etc. And one of the names that Steve Austin asked Mick Foley was Cesaro. He said Cesaro. And Mick Foley just waxed lyrical about the Swiss Superman. He said, Vince McMahon, he looked directly into the camera and said, Vince McMahon, I'll get down. And he got down on his hands and knees and said, please push Cesaro. Please push Cesaro. You won't regret it. And I saw that clip because a lot of people were talking about it. A lot of people were talking about how Mick Foley was being, over the top, and he was being silly. And my response to it at the time is, Mick Foley, at the end of the day, Mick Foley is a pro wrestling fan. That's why a lot of the people get into pro wrestling. Not all the people. There are the people that get into pro wrestling, and it's all about the money. Bill Goldberg talks openly about that. Kevin Nash also talks about that. But Mick Foley, obviously, even in his post-retirement years, is a big fan of pro wrestling, and he's a fan of WWE. And he's been very vocal on social media about pushing certain talents, whether it's Becky Lynch or when Daniel Bryan didn't win the Royal Rumble, didn't he put the baseball bat through the TV or something like that? He's been very vocal about all that kind of stuff, and he's been a big proponent of pushing Cesaro. But when he said, and he got his hands and knees, and he was saying to Vince McMahon, oh, please push Cesaro, please push Cesaro, all this kind of stuff. I saw that video and I went, he is getting pushed. If you compare what Cesaro has done in 2021 against any year of his WWE career, he is having by far the best year of his WWE career, by far. The guy had a singles match against one of the top stars in WWE, a former world champion, Seth Rollins, at WrestleMania. On top of that, he won that match. Not only did he have a featured program against Seth Rollins, again, one of the top stars in WWE heading into WrestleMania, he won that match. He then followed that up by participating in his first ever singles pay-per-view main event, his first ever opportunity at the Universal Championship. Yes, he lost, but everyone's losing to Roman Reigns right now, as they should. Nobody should be beating Roman Reigns. Cesaro had a main event feud with the top champion in WWE, the top star in WWE. I'm sure he made good money because that's pretty much the peak. If you're not going to be the world champion, you want to be working against the world champion in a main event of a pay-per-view. That's a big deal. And they had, a 30-plus minute match? It was a fantastic match at WrestleMania Backlash. Yes, of course, he didn't win, but he was never going to win. And that's not just because he's Cesaro. That's not just because he's whatever. That's because Roman Reigns isn't dropping the title to anybody. Irrespective of who he's facing, he's not dropping that championship. So I see the Mick Foley comment and I say, well, he is getting pushed, for all of those years. Cesaro's biggest moment in his WWE career was winning the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at 2014. That led to a partnership with Paul Heyman that went nowhere in a hurry. This year, you've had a singles WrestleMania match against Seth Rollins. You competed for the Universal Championship. You're still a featured player on SmackDown. Arguably, if you're going to line up all the talent on SmackDown right now, Cesaro's in the top 3 baby faces on that show? Think about it. I mean, who else? Who else is the top babyface on that show? I mean, certainly in recent months, Cesaro has been booked as one of the top, if not the top babyface on that brand. That's a big deal. That's a significant deal for Cesaro. He's on the best run of his career right now. What I will say about tonight's match against Seth Rollins is it's time for it to end. It's time for it to end, and WWE does this. It feels like they do it specifically with Seth Rollins. I don't know what it is with this guy. What is it with Seth Rollins? Honestly, what is it with Seth Rollins in dragging out feuds? Oh, think about his last 2 feuds. What have his last 2 feuds been in WWE? One is Cesaro, which is now. The other, the one before that, was Rey Mysterio. That goes way back, all the way to the night after, Money in the Bank? That goes back to May of 2020. Over a year ago, he was feuding with Rey Mysterio, Dominic Mysterio, the Mysterio family, Leia Mysterio, Angie Mysterio, Murphy, all of that craziness and nonsense. That lasted, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months. It started on Raw. It finished on SmackDown. It lasted that long. The only reason it ended, by the way, is, WWE wouldn't have ended that as quickly as they did. I say quickly, but WWE wouldn't have ended that in November last year had Seth Rollins not gone on paternity leave when Becky Lynch gave birth to Rollins and Lynch's first child. They would have carried that on, and who knows how long that would have carried on for. So Seth Rollins, for whatever reason, his 2 last feuds, Cesaro and Rey Mysterio, have just gone on forever. And I just don't get it. I really don't get it. And this feud between Cesaro and Rollins, yes, I know Cesaro had the match against Reigns in between, and that kind of cut up this feud between Rollins and Cesaro, but it's time for something different. It's time for something different. Now, as far as the Seth Rollins character right now, again, it's a strange one, because is Seth Rollins right now as hot as he was, say, 2019 version of Seth Rollins prior to winning the Universal Championship at WrestleMania 35? The answer is no. The answer just flat out is no. And I don't really know what happened to Seth Rollins. Again, because if you trace back his sort of trajectory over the course of the last few years, it's odd. It really is odd. You can trace it all the way back to when the Shield first split up and he got aligned with the Authority. When the Shield split up in 2014 and he became the Authority's golden child or whatever, Seth Rollins turned into one of the hottest acts in WWE. Certainly being pushed in that sense as one of the hottest acts in WWE. Wins Money in the Bank, eventually becomes world champion, has it was memorable run with the championship. Maybe he didn't set the world alight, but certainly had matches against John Cena, double champion, United States champion and WWE champion, the match against Sting. Had big moments. Feud with Brock Lesnar, feud with Kane, and then eventually obviously got the knee injury, and then he came back, and then slowly that transitioned into the babyface run, which eventually, after a while of toiling around going for Intercontinental Championships, Tag Team Championships, eventually he got over to a point where he was considered, this is the guy that's going to be the equal top babyface in WWE. While you have Roman Reigns on SmackDown at the time as the top babyface, Seth Rollins is going to be on Raw as the Universal Champion, as the top babyface on Raw. And that was really solidified in 2019, winning the Royal Rumble, and then beating Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, and beating Brock Lesnar again at SummerSlam that year. But it just didn't work. And looking back on it in a bit of retrospect now, I think it didn't work because I don't think Rollins was helped out at all with the creative. And it's been proven at this point, WWE just doesn't know how to book a top babyface without eventually turning them stale and having the fans turn on them. A lot of people criticize the fans for that. They'll always say, the fans, you want, and then you get it, and then suddenly you turn on the top babyface. I think that's the fault of WWE creative. We're seeing it with Drew McIntyre now because the babyfaces just get booked in such a strange manner, and the dialogue they're given, the stories they're given, if anything, they're so cheesy and they're so, I'm goody two-shoes that you have to boo them. It's like the Bo Dallas character, but they're trying to make him like a babyface. It's bizarre. And since Rollins turned heel after he feuded with The Fiend in 2019, he did the Monday Night Messiah gimmick, which did have potential for a while, but then once again, his promos, and this is where he's kind of got to now, is that his promos became very long-winded And a lot of the times he would do these for the greater good, embrace the vision, all that kind of stuff. And you'd be talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And then you'd be watching some of his segments. You're going, this is actually really boring. This is actually really dull. And that's what it was like last year with Rollins and all of this embrace the vision with Murphy and the whole thing with the Mysterio storyline, which was ridiculous anyway. But these promos would just go on and on and on. And it felt like the same thing every week, and it was dull. And Seth Rollins, of course, he ditched that gimmick because he came back with something different at the start of this year. It's kind of a hybrid version. It's not so preachy anymore. It's not as preachy as the Monday Night Messiah or the SmackDown Savior gimmick was. But I don't really know what it is. I can't right now really define what the Seth Rollins character is, apart from he wears loud suits and laughs. The issue is that's not really a gimmick. That's not a defined character. At this point, I don't know what Seth Rollins is. If I asked you, and you can let me know in the comment section, but if I asked you, what is the Seth Rollins character right now? What is his gimmick? What is he? You know, Roman Reigns is easily definable. You can define exactly what Roman Reigns is. He's the tribal chief. He's the head of the table. He's a Samoan, almost mafia leader. He's got his special counsel, his lawyer, and Paul Heyman. He's got his minions in terms of his cousins, his family. It's a mafia-style storyline. It's easy to define exactly what Roman Reigns is. Bobby Lashley on Raw, it's easy to define what he is. He's a badass. He's got MVP as his manager. Again, it's kind of similar to Roman Reigns, but without the family aspect to it. But again, it's easy to define exactly what Bobby Lashley is. I look at Seth Rollins, and I can't really define what he is or his character is right now, apart from he wears loud suits, and that's about it. What else is there? What else is there? Now, as far as an outcome for this one tonight, I think it's difficult to predict, frankly. I think if you're really insistent on really defining and establishing, rather, Cesaro, I think he has to win. I don't think he does, though. I think Seth Rollins, WWE will want to get Rollins' win back. I think, personally, I think that Seth Rollins, he lost at WrestleMania. Cesaro did lose at WrestleMania Backlash, but I think they probably have big plans for Rollins going forward over the summer. Whether that or not that's eventually challenging Roman Reigns for the Universal Championship, I do think that's going to happen at some point. They've teased it a couple of times with the stare-off between Rollins and Reigns. Again, with Rollins' character right now, though, I just don't know how that works. Because even if you turn Rollins babyface, he's still not all that likable. And again, his character still at the moment is just, I wear loud suits and I laugh. I mean, I thought at one point we were getting somewhere because when Rollins did the attack on Cesaro on SmackDown, of course, because after Cesaro lost to Roman Reigns at WrestleMania Backlash, Rollins came out, beat the hell out of Cesaro. The following episode of SmackDown, they did a beatdown again where Rollins did the stomp on Cesaro on the stage and all that kind of stuff. They kind of did a story where Rollins was like, I don't even remember what happened. I just kind of blacked out. I just lost it. I just lost my mind. I can't describe or define what came over me. I just went crazy. And even backstage, he seems to have this element of remorse about him. And he's doing this interview with Caleb Braxton. He's like, I don't even remember. I can't even tell you what happened out there. I just lost it. I don't know. And then Cesaro gets wheeled across him, which was ridiculous because the guy just been stomped into the floor. Why on earth would you wheel the guy who just got stomped past the guy who stomped him backstage? Where's the logic in that one? Nevertheless, he gets wheeled past Seth Rollins, and once again, like that, like a hair trigger, he explodes again. He goes crazy, starts screaming at him. And I watched that at the time because I did a review thing straight after. I went, that's what Seth Rollins needs to be. That's exactly it. He can be this guy that is loud, and he has these crazy suits, and he's almost maniacal, but his psyche is just so fractured at this point that he doesn't even know when he's going to explode, and he's just kind of lost it. That's a character. That's easy to define. You can define then what Seth Rollins is. We don't have that right now, and they haven't really revisited it. The segment when Cesaro returned the other week on SmackDown, that Ding Dong Hello segment with Bayley and Seth Rollins, to be honest with you, it was just bizarre. You have Bayley in there that's doing the cackling, laughing. That's the storyline for her and Bianca Belair for Hell in a Cell. But then Seth Rollins is there, and they're laughing, and it just felt lazy, I felt at the time. I thought, well, okay, these guys are heels, but they're heels because what? They laugh? I mean, where's the heel tendencies? And I enjoyed Cesaro returning, and they did the thing this past week on SmackDown whereby Cesaro was in a sit-down interview. It was a similar kind of vein to how Seth Rollins was in a sit-down interview the other week, but Cesaro did answer questions, and Rollins showed up, and then Cesaro shoved him over. Again, if I had to predict a winner in this one, I would probably say I think Rollins takes it. The reason I say I think Rollins takes it is because 50-50 booking very much exists. very much exists in WWE today. So I think Rollins would take that. I think, again, they are going to have plans for Rollins going forward over the summer. What they are, I don't know. Again, I think we're going to get to a point at some point where it's Rollins versus Reigns. I think they pay that off. I also think we're probably, and I think it makes a lot of sense to me at this point, that we see Seth Rollins versus Edge at SummerSlam as well. Of course, that's in August. That's on the horizon. We know that Edge is returning for a match at SummerSlam. We know that he is going to be working as a babyface as opposed to the tweener heel. He was working at WrestleMania during the main event with Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan. So Edge is going to be returning. He's going to be working as a babyface, and he's going to be working as a babyface on SmackDown. And you look at the roster that SmackDown has right now, you say, well, there aren't a ton of guys, a ton of heels there that are really worthy of working with Edge at SummerSlam. One is Seth Rollins. Of course, we've never had Seth Rollins versus Edge before, and the story's already there. It's a very easy story to tell. You can trace it all the way back to that Monday Night Raw in 2014. Of course, this was just after the Authority had been removed from WWE because of that match at Survivor Series when Sting made his debut. And the guest host that night for Monday Night Raw was Edge and Christian. They're doing one of their rated R peep shows, whatever they called it. And Edge gets attacked by the Big Show and Seth Rollins threatens to do the curb stomp on Edge onto the Money in the Bank briefcase, says to John Cena at the time, if you don't reinstate the Authority right now, I am going to break Edge's neck once again and I'm going to paralyze this man. Because remember at the time, Edge wasn't cleared and the feeling was that if he took a bad bump or just a bad fall, he could be paralyzed or he could die. That was the fear at the time, so they played on that. Rollins threatened to potentially kill someone on national television or certainly paralyze them and break their neck just to get the Authority back in power. That story's already there. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of anger, 7 years of hate, 7 years of this bubbling over and over. Finally, we can get Seth Rollins versus Edge, let alone it would just be a great match anyway. That story's there. And I think if they want to tell that story properly, they're going to have to get a bit of heat, not the heat behind me, but a bit of heat onto Rollins and build up a bit of momentum. And they don't do that by having Rollins lose to Cesaro in successive matches at WrestleMania, now at Hell in the Cell. So I think Rollins wins because I think they're going to get some momentum back onto Seth Rollins as he faces, I think he faces Edge at SummerSlam. As far as Cesaro, look, I mean, again, Cesaro, you could argue who needs to win this match more. It would be Cesaro. Seth Rollins losing here, does it hurt him? No. Seth Rollins is at that point now where he's Seth Rollins. It really doesn't matter whether he wins or loses anymore. He's a top player in the company. He's a top heel on SmackDown. But again, I think they'll look at it and they'll say, well, Rollins needs something. He needs some kind of momentum heading into this match possibly against Edge at SummerSlam. The issue would be with Cesaro is that if he loses against Seth Rollins, one could argue what is next for him. Yes, he won at WrestleMania. Yes, he worked with Reigns, and I consider, to be honest, the loss doesn't matter. Him working with Roman Reigns, having a main event program, competing for the Universal Championship was one of the rare instances whereby just working in that spot did elevate him. The perception of Cesaro now is that he is a main event player, or certainly can compete in the main event level on SmackDown for the Universal Championship. But back-to-back pay-per-view losses, does that negate his loss at WrestleMania? Partially, because as much as WWE doesn't like to admit it, wins and losses, they do matter. They really do matter. So you could argue that Cesaro needs to win this match more, but I think in looking at it, WWE will just say, look, Rollins is someone that we have big plans for going forward. We have plans for him possibly to face Edge. We have plans for him to possibly face Reigns later on down the line. He needs to start picking up some victories. So I think that's the avenue that they go down. What I will say about Rollins and Reigns before we wrap things up here, what I do think is interesting, if they do eventually go down this route, I mentioned that possibly they could be feuding later on this year for the Universal Championship. How would that work? They're both heels. Reigns obviously isn't switching to a babyface anytime soon. Rollins potentially could. I say, why not go with the 2021 version of the two-man power trip, right? That was Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin in 2001 after WrestleMania 17. Two of the top heels in WWE. They look like they're going to feud. In reality, they come together and they form one of the most devastating and deadly tag teams. Now, that whole storyline was cut short due to Triple H tearing his quad, but certainly they could do something similar on SmackDown. They could say, look, Rollins and Reigns, it looks like they're going to feud. How can their egos coexist? Well, they did at one point when they were members of the Shield. Of course, Jon Moxley's now no no longer with WWE. Put Rollins and Reigns back together. Just because you're not related by blood doesn't mean you're family. Reigns is all about the family and being the head of the table. Maybe he brings in his Shield brother, but then he realizes there isn't enough room for these two guys to coexist at the same table. I think that's a great storyline and something they may address later on down the line. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Cesaro versus Seth Rollins tonight at Hell in a Cell? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, get the rankings, and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.